And today we're really getting into a powerful one.
We really are. Today we're doing a deep dive into a highly personal story that it ballooned into a national conversation about class, culture, and the state of the American dream. I'm talking about J.D. Vance's memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of a family and culture in crisis.
Yeah, this book became a phenomenon for a reason. And, regardless of where you stand politically, it offers this really necessary raw window into a demographic that feels profoundly abandoned.
Who are we talking about exactly?
We're talking about the white working class, specifically those with deep roots in Appalachia who migrated up to the Rust Belt for factory jobs. The book forces you to look beyond just the simple economic data and consider the deep, deep impact of inherited culture and trauma.
Absolutely. And Vance's own story it's the perfect lens for this. He was born in 1984, grew up in Middletown, Ohio, right in the middle of all that industrial decline. He faced, just massive family instability, lived through the rising tide of drug abuse.
And yet somehow
he managed to navigate that completely chaotic environment all the way to a degree from Yale Law School.
Right. And Vance was very clear about his goal in writing this. He wanted to explain to the rest of America and, especially the educated elite, what it feels like to be on the cusp of just giving up and why so many families, who he calls hillbillies, rednecks, or white trash, remain trapped in this self-perpetuating cycle of poverty and despair.
So our mission today is to really unpack that. We're going to move chapter by chapter, trying to understand that unique Scots-Irish cultural identity that defines Greater Appalachia and the Rust Belt.
And to analyze how individual choices and these cultural responses interacted with that very real macroeconomic collapse, we're really looking for the profound why behind the widespread pessimism and, frankly, the hopelessness in this specific demographic.
Okay, let's get right into it, starting with the framework he establishes in the introduction. This really sets the stage for his whole improbable journey.
It really does.
So the introduction. Vance opens with this almost humble look at his own success. He says it's basically absurd for him to be writing a memoir at just 31 years old.
Right. He's like, I haven't won a Pulitzer or run a country.
Exactly. He says he's only achieved the ordinary feat of graduating from an elite university. But then he immediately pivots and stresses that for someone from his background, that achievement is anything but ordinary. It's what he calls the absurdity of success in his specific cultural context.
And he doesn't let you forget the grim reality for the kids still caught in that environment. He grew up in the Rust Belt, a former steel town, dealing with poverty, parental complexity. Specifically, a mother struggling with a severe lifelong drug addiction.
And his main caregivers, his grandparents, Mamaw and Papaw, they never even finished high school.
No. And he points out that the statistical outlook for his childhood peers remains just bleak. A high risk of poverty, dependency on welfare, and a frighteningly high probability of dying from an opioid overdose. This is his starting line. This is where he comes from.
Which brings us to his most controversial and I think central thesis, the argument of culture versus economics. The conventional explanation for the decline of the white working class is, purely economic. You lose the manufacturing jobs, that leads to instability, which then breeds family breakdown and unhappiness.
Vance acknowledges that. He's not denying the industrial decline is real, but he argues that an equally, if not more, critical factor is the community's reaction to these conditions. He basically says that a specific, pervasive culture has developed that actively fosters social decay rather than resisting the economic hardship.
This is where he brings in that very specific, and I think now famous, anecdote.
Yeah, the tile warehouse story. It's powerful. He recounts working at a tile warehouse when he was 26. He describes his 19-year-old colleague, Bob, and Bob's pregnant girlfriend. Both of them had secured what Vance calls great jobs.
Good pay, benefits, the whole package.
The whole thing. But they just fundamentally failed to perform. The girlfriend missed work every third day without even calling in. And Bob was constantly late, taking these bathroom breaks that often lasted 30 to 60 minutes at a time.
That pattern of behavior is it's almost self-sabotaging, especially with a baby on the way and needing those medical benefits.
It's baffling. And he uses it to illustrate his point about a profound lack of, self-determination. When Bob was finally fired, his reaction wasn't shame or regret. It was utter fury, outrage.
He demanded to know how the company could do this to him, right?
Yes, given his pregnant girlfriend and all. Vance argues that this incident just epitomizes the cultural outlook. The inability to connect one's own actions, like constant lateness and long breaks, with the inevitable consequences, like getting fired.
They automatically blame the company, the economy, the system.
Anyone but themselves. And Vance believes this widespread lack of accountability isn't just an individual failing, it's a cultural choice.
That is a very sharp pivot from the usual narrative. And he also tackles the whole idea of identity and stereotypes head-on in the introduction. He makes it really clear that his story has to be understood through the lens of the Scots-Irish working class, the hillbillies, not just white privilege in general.
Exactly. He's pushing back hard against the idea that their struggles are somehow invisible because they are white. He explicitly challenges the welfare queen stereotype, which is, a coded term often used racially. He does this by stating that every single instance of welfare cheating, addiction, and abuse of the system he ever witnessed firsthand involved his own white neighbors and community members.
He's basically saying, we have these exact same problems, but they're often culturally obscured or just dismissed.
And that's the setup. From there, he takes it to the source.
Right. Chapter 1, Jackson, Kentucky.
Chapter 1 is the origin story of the entire culture. We travel to Jackson, Kentucky, deep in Appalachia. Vance considers this his immutable home, no matter how many chaotic physical addresses he cycled through in Ohio. This is the bedrock of what he calls the Hill People ethos.
And he paints such a vivid picture of what that ethos is. It's this strong, almost compulsory hospitality, deep, incredibly complex kinship ties, and an intense, unwavering respect for tradition and for the dead.
Yeah, that custom he shares is beautiful, where if you see a funeral procession, everyone stops their car, gets out, and just offers a quiet salute. It speaks to a deep, flawed sense of community honor.
And at the heart of this culture is the Blanton clan, centered around his grandmother, Mamaw.
These are the people who defined hillbilly law, which is a code marked by extreme and often very violent loyalty and honor. It's a system where any insult is met with immediate, overwhelming physical force.
And the anecdotes he uses to illustrate this justice, are legendary. I mean, they're really something else.
They're wild. Vance describes the time his Uncle Pet brutally beat a trucker unconscious and then gashed him with an electric saw.
Just for insulting his mother.
Just for that. And what's truly remarkable is that the truckers refused to press charges. He implicitly acknowledged the rules of the terrain. You do not disrespect a man's mother in the mountains.
And then there's the other story with Uncle T-Berry.
Oh, the underwear story. It's bizarre. He hears a young man make a crude remark about Mamaw, and he forces the young man to literally swallow Mamaw's soiled underwear. I mean, this is not justice by the state. This is justice defined entirely by their own ferocious code of family honor.
But Vance is careful. He doesn't let us romanticize this culture. He shifts to what he calls the rough reality.
Yes. As he got older, he realized Jackson wasn't the idyllic paradise of his childhood memories.
Yeah.
He points out that a third of the residents live below the poverty line. There's chronic poor health, struggling schools, and the drug epidemic that was already taking hold and would soon just completely ravage the community.
And this leads to this idea of a cultural defense mechanism.
Exactly. Because the culture is built on such fierce pride and honor, it struggles intensely with any outside criticism. Vance references that infamous 2009 ABC News report on Mountain Dew Mouth,
which was about the dental devastation caused by high sugar consumption among poor Appalachian children.
Right. And the community's reaction wasn't, oh, we should address nutrition. It was, how dare they insult us? They reacted with this furious defensive anger at the perceived slight.
So what's the sociological explanation for that kind of defensiveness?
Well, studies show that hillbilly teens, when they're faced with difficulty, often cope using avoidance and wishful thinking. And that mechanism, it prevents honest self-reflection. They are masters at compartmentalizing. They idealize the good parts, the loyalty, the hospitality, while completely ignoring the violence, the poverty, and the rampant drug use that coexist right alongside it.
So this inability to face the unpleasant truths about their own community is, in Vance's argument, a massive internal barrier to any kind of progress.
A huge barrier, which sets the stage for Chapter 2, the Great Migration.
So this is how the culture moved north.
This is it. To understand how this culture moved, we have to look at this chapter. In 1947, Mama at age 13 and Papaw at age 17, they marry and make this pivotal decision to leave Jackson for Middletown, Ohio. They were seeking those high-paying industrial jobs at Armco Steel.
And this wasn't a unique journey, right? This was part of a massive Scots-Irish migration that followed Route 23 north into the Rust Belt.
It was a huge migration. It created this whole new identity in places like Ohio. The local residents in Middletown even derisively called the area Middletucky. That highway, Route 23, it was literally the road that promised economic salvation.
But the move came with this dual stigma.
A profound one. They faced resentment from two different directions. The people they left behind in Kentucky criticized them for becoming too big for your britches and abandoning their kin.
And at the same time, the white, established middle-class neighbors in Ohio viewed them with immediate suspicion, saw them as poor, violent, and uncultured.
The clash of customs must have been just jarring.
Oh, absolutely. And Vance provides the perfect example. The hillbilly postman who decided to slaughter and butcher his chickens right in his urban backyard.
Horrifying his new suburban neighbors, I'm sure.
Completely. It just shows how those Appalachian rural customs, steeped in self-sufficiency, just violently clashed with the unspoken norms of the industrial Midwest.
So on paper, the migration was a financial success. They achieved what Vance calls the illusion of assimilation. Within a couple of generations, the families had reached income parity with their Ohio neighbors. But Vance stresses that culturally, they totally failed to integrate.
Their private lives remained chaotic.
Completely, marked by explosive violence, constant yelling, and Papaw's heavy drinking. That public success was just a mask for deep, deep private struggles.
And we get a glimpse into the emotional weight that Mamaw carried through all this. He talks about Mamaw's frustrated dreams.
Yeah. Despite only having a grade school education, she had this fierce intellect. She dreamed of becoming a child rights lawyer, driven by her deep, protective love for children. But that dream was never realized because of her life circumstances, and that just adds another layer of intergenerational regret to the story.
And critically, Vance observes that their children, his mother's generation, they grew up entirely outside of Kentucky. But they still saw the promises of Route 23 fail.
The chaos, the violence, the instability, it wasn't tied to the mountains. They carried all the problematic elements of the culture with them to Ohio.
Let's skip ahead to chapter 4 now to see what that destination town, Middletown, actually looked like as Vance remembers it in the 1980s.
Okay, chapter 4, Middletown's decline. And by this point, the economic success is basically evaporated, and the visible erosion of the town is just pervasive. He paints this picture of faded parks, increasing petty crime like stolen bikes, abandoned retail complexes, a derelict downtown.
He mentions the sign for the old steel company was broken, right? It read STL.
A perfect metaphor for the town's broken industrial promise, yeah. And this decay is inextricably linked to Armco's legacy. That company literally built the town. It employed tens of thousands of people.
And when the company merged with the Japanese firm Kawasaki, creating AK Steel, it sparked this intense residual anger among veterans and their families who still carried the trauma of World War II.
But Papaw, ever the pragmatist, was quick to shut down that outrage. He dismissed the complaints, saying, the Japanese are our friends now. We should worry about the goddamn Chinese.
It just shows that even their political outlook was based on gut historical instinct, not broad geopolitical strategies.
Exactly. And this whole atmosphere of decay fostered a culture of low expectations and education. While the children of the previous generation might have dreamed of escaping the factory, very few in Vance's generation aspired to higher education.
The high school struggled with a 20% dropout rate.
Right. And the cultural acceptance of academic failure was quiet but powerful. He recalls his own early struggles with math being rationalized away as, fractions are just not her strength.
But this sets the stage for one of the most vital moments in the book, Papaw's intervention.
It's so important. Young JD was humiliated in school for not knowing basic multiplication. He felt genuinely stupid. And Papaw, seeing this defeat, he transformed it into a mission.
He patiently taught JD math for years, made it a daily ritual, rewarded him with ice cream.
And that singular act provided Vance with a lifelong lesson, that a lack of knowledge does not mean a lack of intelligence. It taught him that learning was possible and that his mind was not inherently broken by his environment.
That is the foundation of self-efficacy right there. A beautiful moment of stability amidst all that chaos. Let's pivot now to the internal cost of that chaos as he grew up.
Yeah, that's where things get really dark.
So as we move into chapter 5, we see the true extent of the early instability he faced. He recounts the emotional trauma of being adopted and then later abandoned by his mother's second husband, Don Bowman.
And his mother's life was just a revolving door of partners, up to a dozen, depending on how you count them, including Bob, the man who perfectly fit the hillbilly stereotype with missing teeth and a fondness for Mountain Dew.
So this environment meant that the culture of conflict was all JD knew.
It was all he knew. Conflict was loud, dealt with by yelling, fighting, or these explosive emotional outbursts. His learned behavior emphasized absolute, unquestioning loyalty to family honor. You defended your mother or Mamaw's reputation, even if it meant fighting a fifth grader who mouthed off. It was pure reactive defense.
The instability really peaked when they moved to Preble County, right? That removed the immediate safety net of Mamaw.
It did. And even though the family income briefly soared over $100,000, financial stress was constant because of massive consumer debt. This chaos culminated in Mom's violent arguments and that terrifying car crash.
An apparent suicide attempt that Mamaw suspected was really a distraction from an affair.
Yeah. It was the breaking point that forced their return to Middletown. And the defining moment of realization for Vance comes during the courtroom scene. He's sitting in juvenile court dealing with his mother's latest crisis, and he looks around and realizes his identity aligns perfectly with the other families there.
The non-suited, working-class white families who spoke with his same accent.
Right. And in stark contrast, so the clean, professional TV accent officials, the judge, the lawyers, the social workers. He realized, this is my tribe, and we are the ones consistently in trouble with the system.
That sense of a distinct, troubled identity was then reinforced when he took a California trip to visit his Uncle Jimmy in Napa.
Absolutely. Outside that Appalachian migration corridor, his accent and his mannerisms made him feel like a true outsider. He realized that hillbilly wasn't just some derogatory term. It was a real, geographically defined culture, and he was squarely a part of it.
And Chapter 6 dives even deeper into the sheer complexity of his family unit.
Chapter 6, Family Complexity and Faith. Vance struggles with the literal definition of siblings because of his mother's endless succession of marriages and live-in partners. It created this constantly shifting household landscape.
And the high point of family drama is, without a doubt, the modeling scam and Mamaw's wrath.
Oh, that story. Mom attempted to take JD and his sister Lindsay to New York under the guise of a fake modeling agency trip. When the trip dissolved into chaos, a ferocious argument erupted in the car.
And the only thing that ended the fight
was Mamaw, who was driving at the time, stopping the car in traffic, pulling out a gun, and threatening to shoot his mother.
It's just a shocking level of volatility.
It is. But Vance uses this terrifying event to show the extremity of the emotional instability he had to endure. Mamaw was capable of explosive violence, but her actions were almost always rooted in a desire to protect the children from his mother's recklessness.
And against this backdrop of instability, we see Mamaw's faith emerge.
Yeah, she was fiercely personally Christian, but she deeply distrusted religious institutions. She saw them as money-grubbing shams. Her theology was focused on agency. God helps those who help themselves. She cited the parable of the flood. God sends you opportunities, a car, a boat, a helicopter, but you have to choose to take them.
That was her lifelong lesson. Hard work, never giving up, and hope.
And then later, Vance reconnects with his biological father, Don Bowman, who had found stability through a really rigid form of Pentecostalism. This new environment offered JD the peace and structure he craved. Daily family dinner, no yelling.
But it came with a heavy cost.
A very heavy cost, a suspicious view of the secular world. Vance, desperate for belonging, threw away his Black Sabbath CDs and started questioning evolution, fearing his non-fundamentalist Christian relatives were probably heretics. It shows how willing he was to trade cultural freedom for just a little bit of emotional safety.
And that search for safety gets even more desperate in Chapter 7. This chapter details a devastating turning point, the sudden loss of stability with Papaw's death at age 72.
Chapter 7, Papaw's loss and addictions rise. JD, just 13, has to reflect on his grandfather's incredibly complex legacy. This was the man prone to violent outbursts, but also the man who patiently taught him math and protected him from the worst of his mother's instability.
And in the immediate aftermath, his mom just plunges into opioid addiction.
She does. Vance recounts the horror of finding her unconscious in a car wash with a needle still in her arm. This isn't some abstract social decay he's writing about. This is the Appalachian drug crisis hitting the most intimate, personal level possible.
He's forced to attend Narcotics Anonymous meetings with her, and during one of these meetings, he has this external realization about the crisis.
He does. He hears a struggling, homeless addict mention he was born in Owsley County, Kentucky, one of the poorest places in America. And that single conversation reinforces the intimate geographical link between the Appalachian homeland, the migration, and the drug epidemic that was systematically tearing apart these Rust Belt communities.
It's also during these meetings that his mom tries to reframe her addiction as a medical disease.
And Vance, despite how young he is, rejects this outright. He sees her choices as profoundly destructive and selfish. His rejection of the disease model, focusing instead on personal responsibility and choice, becomes a core philosophical underpinning of the whole book. He saw the devastation of his family as a choice she just kept making, over and over.
Which leads to Chapter 8, The Search for Stability.
Right. By the end of his 8th grade year, Mom insists JD move with her and her new partner, Matt, to Dayton. And this move strategically cut the distance between JD and Mamaw, his one consistent safety net. It plunged him right back into intense precarity.
So when his mother's addiction reemerged, which it did quickly, JD was forced to make a drastic choice.
A huge choice. He fled to live with his stable but culturally very strict dad, Don Bowman. He found the peace he desperately craved, the daily family dinners, the lack of yelling, but he felt completely stifled. He had to hide his magic card game, terrified his conservative stepmother would think it was satanic.
So he traded chaos for rigid conformity, and that conformity felt just as isolating in a different way.
Exactly. The cultural comfort of his upbringing, however chaotic, still pulled at him. He realized he needed stability, but on his own terms. When he chose returning home to Mamaw, she provided the ultimate anchor. She said, "Here is your home, JD, and that will always be so."
What's so striking is the acceptance from his father, Don Bowman. Even though he was religiously strict, he conceded. He said, "You can't get away from your crazy grandmother. I know she's good to you."
It was a powerful acknowledgement that sometimes the necessary stability comes from the most unconventional places.
And then, Chapter 9. This chapter represents the deepest personal betrayal and the ultimate turning point toward his own independence.
Chapter 9. The breaking point and the Marines. At age 15, his mom confronts him with the ultimate demand. She asks him to provide clean urine so she can pass a drug test and keep her nursing license.
And Vance describes the rage that followed as one of the defining moments of his life. He screams at his mother, but he also screams at Mamaw, accusing her of having enabled mom's behavior for 30 years. It's a moment of profound emotional collapse for him.
It is. And yet, Mamaw's counsel is surprisingly pragmatic. She urges him to comply, justifying the lie not for mom's current well-being, but as a necessary act to maintain the faint hope that mom might eventually change.
He complies, but the incident is devastating. It solidifies his understanding that his mother's life choices are just fundamentally unstable. And this incident is what finally forces Mamaw to take him in permanently.
And life under Mamaw's roof was structured by her 3 rules: good grades, a job, and help when needed. It was stable, if constantly challenging. She provided this brutal honesty, "You're the shittiest card player I know," but unwavering consistency. And that stability allowed him to recover and focus on school.
It's during this period, working at a place called Dillman's, that he gains this crucial early political insight.
Yeah, he observed the widespread working-class frustration that was fueling the conservative shift, this deep resentment over perceived welfare abuse by their neighbors in Section 8 housing.
And he notes the cruel irony. The people receiving welfare looked and acted exactly like them. It created resentment against their own class rather than resentment against the larger economic forces that ruined the town.
Right. And Vance connects this grassroots frustration directly to the political alienation of the time, almost foreshadowing the big political shifts that would happen in the 2010s.
This realization about the lack of external structure leads to his biggest decision yet, the Marine Corps decision.
Influenced by his cousin Rachel, who is a veteran, Vance enlists at 17. He recognized he just wasn't mentally or emotionally ready for the unstructured freedom of college. He was still wrestling with all the chaos he had inherited. The Marines offered discipline, an external structure, and an escape route.
And Mamaw, fearing for his safety, was the only one who fought him on it.
She was. And his greatest fear upon departure was entirely focused on her, that she wouldn't survive his 4 years of service. It's a testament to the fact that while he was desperate to leave the culture, he was terrified of losing the one person who saved him from it.
His last phone call home, cut short by a drill instructor. It just symbolizes that abrupt and necessary severance from his old life.
Absolutely. Which brings us to a whole new world for him.
So, after his service in the Marines and a successful undergraduate run at Ohio State, Vance pursues the highly improbable. He applies to the big 3 law schools.
And he lands a spot at Yale Law. He enters a new world entirely. Chapter 12. Yale Law.
And immediately he is just seized by the imposter syndrome.
Oh, completely. Academically, he performs well, but culturally and socially, he feels like an intellectual fraud. And this feeling is cemented when a particularly harsh, notorious professor critiques his writing, commenting that students from public universities require constant hand-holding.
Which is a direct reinforcement of Vance's fear that he was totally out of place.
He realizes he is an anomaly at Yale. He's a large white veteran with a Southern accent whose parents did not go to college. He notes that the vast majority of his classmates share this deeply privileged, highly credentialed background, which makes him a complete statistical outlier.
This cultural disconnect creates this deep cultural discomfort. There's that striking example where he lies to a Yale staffer.
He does. He claims his girlfriend attends the university, simply to avoid admitting that he, the son of a hillbilly family, had achieved such elite status. He felt a profound sense of betraying his roots, like a cultural traitor, by claiming his success openly to an official who might judge his background.
So navigating this totally unfamiliar world required a guide.
It did. And that brings us to chapter 13, the new norms. He meets Usha, his future wife, who essentially becomes his cultural guide to the elite professional world. She taught him all the unspoken rules of success: go to office hours, actively network, master the social dynamics of the Ivy League.
And this leads us to the classic painful and kind of hilarious FIP fiasco.
The fall interview program dinner.
Yeah.
Yes, this wasn't just a dinner, it was a high-stakes cultural test. And Vance, completely unfamiliar with the codes of the elite, he struggles immediately. He orders Chardonnay because he could pronounce it more easily than Sauvignon Blanc.
And he tries to order sparkling water, thinking it was a healthy choice.
Only to spit out the Pellegrino in front of the interviewers, complaining that the carbonation meant the water was faulty.
The image of him literally having to call Usha from the restroom mid-dinner for a crash course in etiquette is just perfect.
He needed explicit instructions on which of the 9 pieces of silverware to use first. Use them from the outside in, JD. It just highlights how subtle yet absolutely critical these unwritten cultural tests are for social mobility.
And despite this social fumbling, what really highlights the difference between his old life and his new one is the role of connections.
Exactly. Vance almost completely bombed the key interview. Yet he secured the job because a powerful professor who believed in him intervened directly, advocating for him to the hiring partner. And this demonstrates that in the elite world, connections and advocacy often trump pure meritocratic performance, a reality entirely foreign to the working class ethos that values only hard labor.
So success came at a deep cost of mobility. Not only did he change his values and habits, but he experienced this real cultural isolation.
That Cracker Barrel story.
Yeah, he recalls taking a Yale friend to Cracker Barrel, a place his grandparents viewed as the pinnacle of culinary finesse, only for the friend to find the entire experience confusing and disgusting. That cultural gap makes success feel isolating, because he no longer entirely belongs to either world.
Which brings us to the psychological heart of the memoir, chapter 14, Confronting Trauma.
And his adult conflicts reveal that the trauma of his childhood still governed his emotional responses. Usha calls him the turtle, describing his tendency to retreat into his shell and shut down during any conflict.
A direct consequence of his chaotic upbringing. And this behavior is deeply rooted in learned helplessness versus resilience. Vance connects his experiences to Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris's work on adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. He explains the bear coming home from the bar analogy, that chronic, unpredictable stress in childhood permanently activates the brain's fight or flight response.
The chaos of Middletown taught him he had no control over his life, fostering this profound learned helplessness.
And the great paradox is that the role of the Marines was the exact antidote. The military forced him into a constant stream of physical and mental challenges, compelling him to overcome what he previously thought was impossible. And this process systematically built self-efficacy, replacing that sense of powerlessness with the belief in his own will and capability.
The transition from anger to gratitude is marked by the Iraq revelation.
During his deployment, he witnesses a young Iraqi boy smile purely out of gratitude for receiving a simple eraser. And this moment shifts his perspective entirely. He realizes that despite his dysfunctional past, he was born into incredible privilege, supported by a family that, though flawed, loved him fiercely. This fosters immense gratitude and begins to dissolve his long-held corrosive bitterness.
He also gains the necessary distance to analyze these negative family patterns.
He does. He observes that his sister, Lindsay, and his Aunt Tante Wee still employ the same aggressive, defensive, conflict-driven communication style he learned at home. And recognizing this as an inherited cultural pattern rather than a personal failing helps him break the cycle himself.
The final piece of emotional reconciliation is found in Pawpaw's tears.
Yeah. Uncle Jimmy tells Vance the story of Papaw being caught crying over Mom's struggles, lamenting, "I wasn't there for her." And this realization that Papaw, the strong, sometimes violent man, harbored this deep guilt and love, it softens Vance's own lingering anger toward his mother. It places her struggles in the necessary context of intergenerational failure and love.
Which brings us to the final chapter, chapter 15, an enduring crisis and a path forward.
Vance concludes the memoir by checking back into the world he left behind, confirming that the crisis is far from over. He describes a recent encounter at a rundown motel Spiders on the awning, a man with a syringe, a sad, toothless clerk, confirming the ongoing crisis persists years after his escape.
When he's pressed for solutions, Vance makes it clear there is no magic solution.
No. He argues the problems are too complex, interwoven with familial, religious, and cultural factors, to be solved by a simple, sweeping government program. He believes these issues will always exist, but the focus has to be on saving those who are on the tipping point.
And he reflects on the immense role of intervention in his own life.
His success was not inevitable. It hinged on a multitude of interventions. The consistent stability of his grandparents, the protection of his sister and aunt, access to education, and the structure of the military. He argues that if any of those key players had been missing, he almost certainly would have failed.
He highlights the story of his cousin Gail's success story as powerful proof that agency matters.
It's a great example. Gail was abandoned by her father, became pregnant at 17, and faced family rejection and racism. Yet she succeeded by adopting these strict internal rules, no drugs, no alcohol, and focusing relentlessly on hard work. Gail proves that hillbilly resilience and strict self-agency can conquer devastating statistics.
Based on all this, Vance offers some targeted policy recommendations.
He does. He calls for reforming child protective services to better support kinship care, acknowledging that relatives like Mamaw, even if they are technically unlicensed foster parents, are the best safety net. He also argues against the segregation of the poor through programs like Section 8 housing, which clusters the vulnerable together, limiting their exposure to positive role models and resources.
But ultimately, the message comes back to cultural responsibility.
Yes. Vance argues that the true, lasting change must come from within the community. It has to focus on self-agency and stopping the ingrained impulse to blame external forces, whether it's Obama or Bush or faceless corporations, for individual failures.
And he ends with the poignant, symbolic resolution of the final nightmare.
For years, he had this recurring dream of being chased by a monster, with Mom and Lindsay escaping without him. The dream finally changes. He is the monster, chasing his dog, but he chooses not to harm him. He wakes up with the profound relief that he actively resisted his inherited tendency toward anger and violence.
It's the ultimate personal confirmation that he has chosen connection and stability over chaos and flight.
A powerful ending.
Vance's memoir is a complex and, sometimes uncomfortable exploration, but it stands as a testament to the sheer importance of localized personal intervention, the power of a grandparent, the structure of the military against these overwhelming cultural and economic forces. His success was anything but guaranteed. It was forged by a series of hard choices, backed by deeply flawed but supportive, loving people who helped him find stability.
Yeah, the knowledge we gain here is how fundamentally linked personal trauma, inherited culture, and economic destiny truly are. We have to recognize that the most powerful tool for change, particularly for people operating on the margins, isn't always some massive systemic shift, but the ability to foster self-control and provide the necessary, stable, loving relationships that empower individuals to choose connection and accountability over the chaos they inherited.
That's a powerful point, and one that resonates far beyond the hills of Appalachia. Thank you for walking us through that deep dive.
My pleasure.
We'll catch you next time for the deep dive.